Welcome, everybody. Happy to have you here in this session today and hope you will be satisfied in the end when we will be talking about margins under pressure and what tariffs and the volatile environment as a whole mean for pricing and RGM. I'm joined today by my fellow colleagues, Ivan and Doug. Ivan, our Director of Innovation, and Doug, our Head of Customer Value, who has a live demo planned, navigation through the Binomics platform and how you counteract those, this VUCA world, basically, how you can predict shopper behavior. So make sure to stay to the end when we have this live session. And quickly on Binomics, if you go to the next slide at Binomics, we help companies make smarter and faster decisions in revenue growth management. We've developed our virtual shoppers AI technology that simulates real-world shopper behavior with up to 95% predictive accuracy. We enable holistic optimization of all RGM levers, including pricing, promo, PPA, portfolio mix, and costs, while also accounting for competitive dynamics and retailer pressures. And our customers, including Nestle, Unilever, L'Oreal, see up to 4% higher gross profits and save up to 80% time spent on their analysis. If you want to book a demo with us, to meet with us, to talk about your challenges and how we can help you solve them, please feel free to book a demo or contact us on LinkedIn or everywhere, and we'll make sure to connect. And with that, the stage is yours, Ivan. Let's get into the presentation.
Thanks a lot. Very quickly, agenda, what I'm going to talk about. I wanted to give a bit of a general landscape of the tariffs and what's going on right now. Obviously, just bear in mind that we are not up to speed because the news change every day, and I think that's a very important caveat to what I'm about to show you. Then economic and business impacts of tariffs, how they impact especially CPG industries, certain key RGM mitigation strategies that I want to also talk about, and then broader considerations and outlook. And then in the end, as Jonathan said, we will have a live session and then Q&A in the end. Let me start quickly to give you an overview. Obviously, I consider everyone is interested in the topic. There were a lot of news. Tariffs, they were introduced somewhere around April. Then afterwards, they were postponed. They were paused for 90 days. Then there was a huge escalation with China, tariffs reaching, I think, 145% at certain point. Probably people stopped actually following. The current discussions are, there were also some potential escalations with the EU again, up to 50%. In the end, I think the message is that moving forward, it's completely unclear what's going to happen. However, I totally understand, especially for the US colleagues, that it's important to plan ahead how to respond to those tariffs, because that's a huge change and a huge impact on especially inbound materials, raw materials, packaging materials, on some companies, finished goods as well. And that's something that is very, very hard to predict at the moment. Therefore, I would say my biggest takeaway of the tariffs is that obviously they have huge economic impacts, but the main kind of headline for me is unpredictability, because the current situation is that it's like a roulette that you can kind of you don't know what's going to be tomorrow. And obviously for CPG industries, when we will start discussing a bit RGM levers, for some of them, you need more stable forecast of what's going to happen, certain stability. And if, let's assume we have a 50% tariff on all the imported goods, which obviously will be a bad thing, but if we know that this, with a certain degree of certainty, that these tariffs will stay for the next 20 years, the companies probably will be able to respond to that with much better tool set than if they know, okay, today is 50%, but I don't know what's going to happen in 1 month. And I think that's the core issue right now. We actually wanted to make it a bit more interactive and run a poll. And just to get your perspective, what's the biggest impact of recent tariffs on your business? Obviously, it depends, but I think we have very diverse audience, and that will be really cool to see that,
Yes. Thank
Jonathan.
you, Ivan. First interactive element. Let me launch the poll today and read it for everybody joining by phone. What's been the biggest impact of recent tariffs on your business? Is it increased input costs, supply chain disruptions, pressure on pricing and margins, more difficult retailer negotiations, limited or no impact so far? Other, please specify in comments, or not answering. And I'll give you, I'd say, 20 more seconds. So please lock in your answer. I can already see one option receiving the most attention as of now. 10 more seconds. We're at 60% participation rate right now, 65%. Okay. And with that, I'm ending the survey and sharing the results. Ivan, pressure on pricing and margins is the number one option. You would have expected that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit tricky because the question obviously is that pressure on pricing and margins is the result of the, let's say, the underlying pressures, because I also see that increased input costs, supply chain disruptions, because they all in the end impact the margins, because this impacts your COGS, aka you need to react on with, I guess, pricing response to that. So yes, very much expected. All right, thank you. Let's move on. Okay, wait. All right, yeah. So I think that's exactly was pretty much, I would say, summarized in different in what Jonathan brought as an interactive element. My kind of thinking right now is that mostly it impacts the input costs and supply chain. Well, but supply chain partially is the result of input costs, because if your input costs increase of your whatever raw packaging materials, the businesses obviously they try hectically to overcome that, and potentially with changing supply chain routes, etc. So, and that would create additional pressure. I don't know if everyone starts switching from suddenly from China to, I don't know, to, for example, Cambodia, then automatically that means that the load on the logistics on Cambodia will kind of increase, that results in this disruption. And then the rest of that are more like the consequences of that. Obviously, if you're importing the finished goods, then there's a direct pressure, because then you're directly impacted. Your actual COGS are full cost of the product that you're importing. So your mitigation strategies are significantly more limited. And then you right away probably would go to your pricing discussions or negotiations with retailers. Therefore, I think all of them are quite relevant, but like the root cause of that is obviously somewhere with the input costs. So we kind of prepared here several options, and how the tariffs and how probably companies respond to that. We would have another poll later, which I actually personally really interested to see the results of that. But I would say there are two sides of the tariff response. One is RGM driven, what today we consider as 5 pillars of RGM. And the other one is more, I would say, other levers. They are mostly supply chain logistics. I try to also sort them or order them by the, let's say, speed of implementation. However, just with the one caveat that obviously, depending on the country, the fastest option, which might be price change, could be actually the slowest option, depending on the country. because obviously if you go to countries with high pricing regulations, my personal experience, I worked in UAE. There was a certain regulation that you cannot change prices, let's say overnight. So for sure it would impact that. In some countries it's even more stricter regulated, etc. And the same obviously on the right side. Yes, there are certain things you can do, and then like contract review and negotiation with the suppliers might be a good option and a fast option. However, depending again on the contracts, on their strictness, etc., it might be the slowest one. So it's very, I would say it's directionally that's a bit of the order of the topics of the levers, I would say. And moving forward, I would focus more on the RGM levers because that's the one that I would say I have the highest expertise in. And we, as Binomics, we obviously have we specialize in more RGM topics generally. So the first strategy that companies, and I would assume, to be honest, that a lot of companies, they exercise today, direct price adjustments. That I would say normally very quick, very transparent, because when you have a justification that I have a plus 50% on my import costs, then justification with the retailers might be very quick and transparent. However, obviously the drawback of that is that there's a elasticity of demand involved, so volume loss, potential loss of share. Again, depending if everyone is in the same boat, I would say then erosion of the share is not might be the biggest, let's say, concern. However, obviously, there will be a volume loss because if the price increases beyond certain thresholds, and any price increase will lead to a demand loss. So again, that's very, I would say, good strategy. However, it needs to be obviously well simulated, well thought through, calculated of the potential impact. Then another, let's say, strategy generally on the price pack changes, price pack architecture changes. There are different kind of sub strategies or things that companies might do, and I think the complexity of them varies. One is that has been used quite extensively is shrinkflation, or generally when you reduce the size of a product and then keep the same price. It's essentially hidden price increase. So very similar to the previous one, a bit less direct because, and especially on the negotiations, my personal experience also was that it's sometimes easier to negotiate this change with the retailers rather than a direct price increase. Your net impact might be a bit better, but again, country specific, somewhere it's not no go. Reformulation, change of ingredients. Obviously, if you're, let's say, source 70% of your COGS structure from country A, and this country A receives plus 25% increase, and then your, I don't know, your secondary supplier, secondary option was country B, which does not receive this tariff, you could switch. This obviously is much more it's much a longer process because it depends again on the formulation. Sometimes for flavor purposes, for the quality purposes, not that easy. However, it is a valid strategy. Then different packaging. Again, it's a combination of trying to diversify the packaging offering. If the packaging materials are impacted, it could be also a valid strategy. That all in all, I would say it is a very good longer term strategy. And obviously companies, I guess a lot of companies, they exercise it no matter tariffs or some other, let's say, price changes or cost changes. But obviously it takes more time because there are R&D costs, certain production flexibilities, etc. So I think that's also a very, I would say, valid balancing factor that you cannot apply it immediately. And sometimes, especially with tariffs, you need to react immediately. Otherwise, your margins go already very low and it becomes, I would say, dangerous already for the business. Then another one that is again touching a third lever of RGM is changing or refining promotions. The refining promotions, it's a combination of I would say in essence, you are still affecting your resulting price, however, in a slightly different way. On the products with a high volume on deal or volume on deal, a share of promotion, depending on the terminology that you use, you could always try to adjust the frequency. I don't know, instead of 12 times a year, promote it 8 times a year. Again, the depth is also a consideration. The only tricky part with the depth, in the end, in most of the countries, the resulting price is defined by the retailer. And depending on the funding of the promotions, it's not always easy to pull back. Just to give you an example, in Germany, for example, that's not very typical to pay for each promotion individually and to give a direct discount on promotion. In a lot of contracts and negotiations, everything is bound to your yearly rebates. So you might have either a fixed amount or yearly bonus for X amount of promotions a year. So if you pull back and you say, okay, instead of 20% I'm going to do discounts, I'm going to do 10% discount, this money do not directly go to the CPG pocket. It goes to the retailer pockets, and then you might have a renegotiation with the retailer. So depending on the company, it might be not a very easy strategy as well. Obviously there's a volume impact. If you start changing the promotion plan, then we all know, especially in many subcategories of CPG, that drives significant amount of volumes, and that might be an impact. And this, I think, requires some heavy lifting in terms of analysis. Companies, they need to be really well prepared with the data, postmortems, ROI calculations of promotions, where you can touch it, where you cannot touch it, etc. So it needs some certain preparation for that. And I would imagine that probably right now there's a certain spike in consulting activities related to promo optimization. I would bet that for some companies, they really go into that because it could be a complicated exercise. All right, then another strategy, which is also, I would say, could be very effective, is trying to collaborate with retailers. And it goes a bit in line with what I said about specificities on the promo arrangements with some retailers. When the tariffs, they increase, retailers, they are like indirectly in the same boat with CPGs, because usually the impact is broader industry. So the retailers, they obviously do not want to sharply increase prices on most of their portfolio, because then they would lose traffic. Their flexibility is limited. Therefore, there could be a good case why the CPGs, let's say, and the retailers could collaborate there. It could be let's say, review of trade terms. So on a certain, let's say, categories, most affected products, the price increase could be shared between, let's say, retailer and CPG. Obviously, this strategy would be less visible to consumer if the half of the price is, let's say, eaten up by the value chain or by both parties. It could be very targeted, because then obviously you would have a negotiation in your portfolio, the portfolio that is most impacted, for example. And on this portfolio, you would have very, let's say, sharper measures versus something else. But definitely to pull this strategy is very, again, country specific. And I would say in some countries and some retailers, it might be a huge challenge. All right. So in terms of let's say, moving forward, what could be done uh, as a, let's say, holistically? Obviously, there's no strategy that works in all the cases, unfortunately. There's no single solution. I would love to give a single solution, but again, everyone here knows their business better, and then I think, it's very valid. Um, you know that there are different instruments. However, depending on the situation, you need to combine them. So I would assume that most of the companies, they would go for either price or promo levers short term, because I think it's a quicker wins, quicker results. And however, long term, definitely PPA is a really strong lever that probably would give you the most flexibility moving forward. However, again, depending on the production limitations, it could be a challenge. Um, Having data and good analytics is really crucial, because I think, again, what I mentioned on the promotions, if you don't know how well particular promotions perform, or at which customers, etc., or how, for example, what your demand elasticity is, how likely your consumers would react to your price changes, it's very hard to make those decisions very effective, because you would probably apply certain strategies anyways, because the business has to take decisions, but obviously the outcomes could be suboptimal. So that's very important. I did let's say, a summary of, and again, that's a bit of our take mostly on the effectiveness of different levers and how applicable they are. However, that's a bit of a summary of RGM plus non-RGM um, levers that could be used, and how they could be applied in different situations. Because I think when you think about, tariffs are very similar in certain areas to COGS increase. Because if you increase COGS, I mean, a lot of the things that you might do are very similar and somehow similar to inflation. However, there is certain, let's say, subtle differences, because tariffs are usually sudden, and then you need to react to them, let's say, quickly. Inflation, on the other hand, is much more, I would say, I wouldn't say it's super predictable, but depends on the market and the context. You can somehow anticipate that. And inflation is somewhat a given. It's not a very unpredictable variable. COGS depends again. Some raw materials increase faster, some of them not. But what we would like to know actually now, it's our second poll, and Jonathan, maybe you can also pull it out. What levers have you used already, for example, to respond to tariffs or inflation? Tariffs would be more interested, I would say, because it's something new right now. Inflation we have seen before. Tariffs is something new, I would be just curious to see what levers were used by you so far.
Yeah, I think I'm curious as well. The audience probably also. Let me pull up the poll. Second and last poll of today for everybody joining by phone. I read the question out loud again. Which RGM lever have you used most often to respond to tariffs or inflation? A, price increases or shrinkflation and pack size changes, product reformulation, promotion optimization, or trade term adjustments, in brackets with retailers. We are at 45% participation rate already. Let's get to somewhat 65%, and then I'll share the results with the broader audience today. Giving you 5 more seconds, so please lock in your final choice. I see one option marking itself as the winner again. And I'm closing the poll now. And poll share results. Ivan, your take.
Yeah, I mean, I was commenting on that. Hopefully I didn't prompt anyone, but yeah, I assume that price increases plus promotion optimization definitely winning. Shrinkflation, I think it's also a fair one, but it depends a bit on the flexibility of the company, but very much in line with what I would expect. And interesting product reformulation, no one actually has used before, which is interesting because of the, as I said, very, very mid long-term strategy. I would say longer term effective, but I guess especially with tariffs right now, since everyone has this unpredictability, right? And then nobody knows what to expect. It's hard to invest. And sometimes product reformulation requires certain investment in capex and production changes. Nobody wants to do that, so somehow makes sense. All right, so I will hand over to Doug for the live demo. Let
Yes.
me get my slide. Yeah. Doug, do you want to take over the screen?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. I think I will share now. So, hello everyone. Nice to see you again. If I've been on a webinar with you before, if not, just a brief introduction. So my name is Doug Hampshire. I lead the customer value team at Binomics. Prior to joining Binomics, I actually spent 8 years doing supply chain consulting and lots around supply chain. This is actually a subject kind of quite close to my heart, so to speak. So what I want to do today is just kind of talk through how we would go about looking at some of those different strategies and how we would go about analyzing. So with Binomics, we train a model based on historic sales data for our kind of virtual shoppers to interact with the scenarios that we make, and we can change, and then we can play around with as if they were real shoppers viewing new products or different prices on the shelf. The first thing I kind of want to talk through is, like, and imagine this scenario, right? We have a 25% tariff. I'm sure there was a country out there that had a 25% tariff at some point, not 40, not 145, but let's go with 25. And essentially we're importing raw materials into a given country. We won't say which one, but a given country, we're importing raw materials. And so basically our costs have gone up by 25% because we're now having to import, and there has been a tariff of 25%. How are we best going to mitigate that strategy? We're going to look at two things. We're going to look at changing the prices and then changing the pack size as well. And what we're really interested in terms of how do our shoppers, how are our consumers going to react to the price and the portfolio changes? So I'm just going to take us through into what we've got here, which is kind of two given scenarios. So we've got our 52-week baseline on the market price in our own products and competitor products. And then we've got our 25% tariff, right? Just at the baseline, when we change our costs by 25% on our raw materials, what we see is that obviously our price on the shelf hasn't changed first up, right? We haven't reacted, so to speak. That means our units are exactly the same in terms of our own products. That means our revenue is exactly the same. But what we see is that our profit is severely impacted, right? We are he was going to use stronger language than kind of down a hole here, but this would be where we would end up, right? With a 25% increase on our COGS, no change in the retailer margin, we're in trouble. So what are we going to do? Well, one of the first strategies we could look at implementing is just a simple 25% price increase. So in the tool, it'd be really, really simple. We could just go through and make a change, right? So what we would do is we would find that scenario that we were looking at. I've got them in a folder here. And I'm going to do 25% price increase on that 25% tariff. So immediately now I can start to see, okay, what is starting to happen when I increase the price by 25%. And you can see all the way down to the different promotional variants here. I've got 25% on both my base and my leaflet promo. So non-promo and leaflet promo. The first thing you can see is that my weighted average price has actually not gone up by 25%. And that's because people are starting to move around in their buying choices. They're probably now buying a bit more on promo than they were on base, which means that my weighted average cost price increase is going up by 25%. We can still see here we've got a 25% increase in our COGS. And then when we start to see the impact on units, you can see what's going on, right? We lose 36% in units, revenue goes down 22%, and our profit goes down 35%. So again, we've started to mitigate some of the changes, right? Flat 25% price increase. It's done a little bit for us, but in terms of our business goals, we're still probably struggling. The counterfactual to all of this is probably our competitors might be struggling as well, right? We might not be the only business in the market that is importing these raw materials. So some of this might be offset. And I saw there was a question, which we'll get onto later, around how do we see elasticities, or what do we think about elasticities changing in the US, for example, with the increase in tariffs? And I'll be happy to answer that in a bit more detail as we go through. So this is one scenario, right? The other scenario could be kind of thinking about this a bit more holistically. So we've just done 25% across every single product in the market of our own products, right? So if you look down here, they're all going up by 25%, or average price goes up by 20, 22, 23% here. What we can do is we could use our optimization engine, we could go into our decision guide, and we could say, okay, what is the best response to a 25% tariff? So again, what are we looking at here? Each one of these dots is a given sort of scenario for a different price increase across our portfolio. And we start here at 0, 0, around here. And what we can see is that the optimization engine gives us roughly 1,280 different solutions with different price changes to look at, okay, what is the best solution to make? And if we take units and profit, we can see that there's a very, very large solution space where we're starting to maximize our profit. So if I just took one of those scenarios, which I've saved, which is kind of on the right-hand side here, where we're significantly increasing our profit on the basis of that price increase, I go back to my table. I'm just going to add in that scenario now. It's kind of aptly named, I think, which is the best response to the 25% tariff and best profit. Now I've selected that scenario. What we can see is that actually we're not going to increase the price by as much. And we can see the differences in our price increases here, right? So this was our blanket price increase, and this was the kind of optimized price increase using the decision guide. We can see that it's suggesting a much steeper price increase on own brand 1 compared to own brand 3. And this will all be because of the trained sensitivities of the shoppers that we've got in our model. And that's based on the learned and observed behavior over the past 3 years. If I just go all the way to the right very, very quickly to look at what happens with profit, you can see here that our profit is actually now only going down 31% compared to that baseline that we started off at 1.5 million. So I'm slowly getting better, right? I've gone from 1.5 million to 400,000 to 1 million to 1.1 million. So I'm getting slightly better. The last thing that I could do, right, is start to be a bit more long-term in my thinking. So something that Ivan was talking about, which was, okay, how do I start to reformulate my packaging, change PPA, or how do I change promotions? All of this we could play around with kind of holistically in the platform. But what I did earlier is I actually changed all of our products. So if we go back here, we can see that under own brand 3, 2, and 1, I've got 6 packs, right? What I want to do is say, okay, you know what? This is actually, I'm under so much pressure here. I'm going to change this to a 4-pack. So let's go ahead and let's analyze what happens when we look at a 4-pack compared to our tariff scenario. So go ahead, and in here, what I've got is my downsizing in response to an increase in 25% tariff. And now what I can see is that immediately in the model, I've got a 6-pack that was in the market, and now I've got this 4-pack. This 4-pack previously didn't exist. We've simulated it based on the attributes. And what is the result? So let's have a look in terms of our average cost. And as a result of reducing that size, we're actually managing to hold our costs very, very constant, despite the fact that the raw materials increased, right? We've gone from a 6-pack to a 4-pack, so downsized by like 25, 20, 30%. And our cost of that product is now, roughly the same as what it was before. Obviously, that product is a lot smaller, but it is now costing roughly the same, which means that unsurprisingly, we sell a lot fewer units. We sell 20% fewer units. Our revenue goes down 20%, but our profit only goes down 16% compared to the 73 that we started off with. So in this case, if you were looking for a long-term strategy where you could accept a loss in market share potentially and hold your margins relatively constant, I mean, 16% isn't great, but it's better than 73, the PPA angle would be the best bet in this example. So I've just kind of showed a kind of walkthrough of the various different strategies and how we go about assessing these types of questions with our clients and what we end up doing day to day. And loads more here, but I'll kind of pause there. I think we want to get to some of the questions, and Jonathan, I'll hand back to you to moderate.
Thank you so much, Doug. Very, very interesting demo. Yeah, let's jump right into the question. I think we have a lot of them, and one of them you teased already. So someone in the Q&A section is asking, how do you expect the tariffs to impact pricing elasticity in the US market?
Yeah. I can take a first view on that. So it's something actually we've seen quite a bit that's starting to be not dissimilar to what we had in Europe fairly recently, which is this kind of general inflationary environment. So what we had is, especially around where you see general price increases for all of the products in the market, we actually saw a softening of elasticities. And I would expect for markets that are fairly commoditized, where there is a lot of consumer choice, all of which the price is going up, we see the price sensitivity decrease to those price increases. And that's purely because we're seeing increases across the board. And actually, what we've seen, especially in the UK very recently and potentially starting to happen in the US, is quite substantial wage growth. So, for example, 9% increase in the average wage going up in the UK. You sort of match your price increases with your wage growth, which means that you're seeing a softening of those elasticities. Now, obviously, this massively depends on what type of product you're offering. So lots of the people we work with are offering, highly commoditized, fast-moving consumable goods, along with more luxury products. And that's where we see a big difference. So luxury products tend to suffer more in this kind of inflationary or price increase environment because shoppers see them as less important to buy, and therefore they switch away from that product. They either switch to a cheaper alternative or they just stop buying.
Yeah. Thanks. Ivan, nothing to add from your side?
No, I think it makes sense. I think Doug said it all. I think I agree.
Perfect. To the next question from Andrew. Any tips regarding how to manage long-term pricing decisions with short-term uncertainty around tariffs? So the long-term versus short-term game.
Ivan, do you want to input from your experience?
Yeah, but as I understood, the question is more, what should we do long-term, considering that the short-term we get the tariffs increase? How can we balance it with so to say, with the pricing decisions? It's very, very difficult question because of, I think it's unprecedented, the tariffs and the volatility of them. I think as I said, the problem is that you don't know what will happen tomorrow. So my general right now and observation is that if it's possible, I would say hold your horses in terms of the increase in prices, because of there are a lot of delays, a lot of those kind of tariff suspension, etc. And if you increase your prices, sometimes it's harder to roll it back unless there's a very dynamic market model. But that's what I would say, probably what I would do. But the problem is obviously the business has, and I guess sometimes the finance departments, they put the pressure right away. So in this case, it's hard to balance, or at least balance it with the portfolio. So not trying to change everything, basically increasing prices on everything, but potentially on certain portfolio pieces where, in essence, you could sacrifice the volume even though they roll back. Because But before those price increases, I guess that's definitely worth to have a conversation with the retailer to try to pull this dynamic maybe pricing model where the price is somehow tied to tariffs. And the moment the tariffs drop or they kind of disappear, you could roll it back. But that's, I don't know, that's my spontaneous answer. Maybe Doc, you have any other idea?
Yeah, I mean, notwithstanding the volatile personalities involved in some of these tariff decisions, I think the key thing and what we've seen in terms of successful implementation of strategies from the people we work with is the investment in flexibility around their inputs and knowledge on this particular case. So, for example, the ability to quickly analyze changes in both competition and your own pricing changes or pricing structure, promotional structure is really important. It's not necessarily about taking an immediate decision. It's more about being able to take the quick decision when you need to, right? Not always do we need to make the decision today, but we need to make the decision within 5 minutes when someone asks us, right? 5 minutes is obviously extreme. And I think whatever you are using to do your analysis, it needs to be agile and quick enough to do that. And I think from what I've seen, that's where people have benefited the most from that type of information.
Nice. Thank you so much. I think one question also goes hand in hand on the collaboration with retailers. Have tariffs or in total in a volatile market, has it changed how you approach retailer negotiations and what things would be key in those negotiations?
Jonathan, can you repeat again?
Yeah. Have tariffs changed how you approach retailer negotiations and what actually changed?
I think I mentioned it, but that's a bit of my view, but it, as I said, very much depends on the retailer. If the retailer is reasonable, obviously they would see that this is a common market situation and then everyone kind of is in the same boat. So I think this situation, although it's not a nice one, it could be a good opportunity for better collaboration with retailers. Having this open conversation about what can we do together, how can we tackle that together, because normally retailer and the CPGs are, I would say, they have slightly different roles, and the retailer's role is normally to negotiate the best price possible. And even though retail, like CPG, might suffer, it's not a big deal, and they have a huge portfolio of companies or suppliers. But in this case, since a lot of suppliers are in the same situation, I think they're more willing to collaborate. So I think the change is that it could be much more collaborative than before. That's a bit of and I would definitely try to use this opportunity.
Thanks. A last question from Lloyd, and then we go into the last part. What if you have a limited portfolio depth? For instance, we simply manufacture one god with limited inputs, but those inputs must be imported because they are farmed in a specific region of the world. So on data.
So if your portfolio is limited to one kind of input, so you don't have too much flexibility on changing the supplier, I guess, right? That's the question.
Yeah,
So I would say,
yeah.
Correct.
No, go ahead, Doug. Yeah.
I was going to say that's what I would understand. I think Lloyd has said correct. So carry on, Ivan.
Okay. No, I would say then in this particular situation, I don't think that beyond your short term is definitely pricing. I don't think there's anything else that you can do. However, but then long-term strategies, but they are, I would say, even more complicated than is what are you going to do in 1-2 years. But as I said, I think unfortunately this type of business is the most exposed one to those tariffs, and this is the one that is because you know how they teach it, I don't know, in the business schools, diversification is the key, right? And it applies to a lot of things. In this particular case, high dependency on one particular source makes you most vulnerable. It gives you a huge advantage potentially, I guess, because it probably was either a cost advantage or quality advantage. But now it makes you the highest threat to your business. So it's pricing, negotiating with retailers, explaining them the situation, explaining it to consumers as well, because that's a marketing huge part. Long term, again, I don't know the details, diversify.
Okay, thank you so much. I think all the other questions that we didn't cover, we make sure to cover them in the follow-up email that we will send out later this afternoon, or wherever you are in the world, maybe this morning or this night, together with the recording. If you would share the slide deck again, I have some, or we have some more resources for you to, for further material, for a follow-up. We have created a cheat sheet on navigating the tariff impact, where we condensed all our learnings into a handy PDF. And we also wrote a long form article, a blog that you can read for free on the internet, which both links you can find in the chat right now. I also make sure to link them in the follow-up email. Because we talked so much about shoppers, retailers, manufacturers, and the alignment between those three parties, I want to make sure that you know of our webinar in 3 weeks, the next session in our webinar series, which will be from zero sum to triple win in RGM, aligning shoppers, retailers, and manufacturers. Then we will be joined by our founder, Dr. Ingo Reinhardt, and product expert Tim, with another view into how you can simulate this.